Welcome to the fourth LinkedIn community coaching session being offered by IDEA. This is funded by our Human Sciences Board of Directors and is available to anyone that participates in any of our IDEA programs. And Dr. K, Kristen Malik from UNL, has been providing us with little short mini lessons at the beginning of each of these coaching sessions that kind of help frame our conversations for later and how we can improve our presence on LinkedIn individually as programs and as an alliance as a whole. So, Dr. K, I'll just turn it over to you.
Awesome. One of the fun things also that Catherine, it's great to include is that the audience who participates in the live meeting chooses the subject for the next one, which is pretty amazing, I think. So I started with one, which was the algorithm and how the algorithm works. And then every session, all of the audience chooses what the next session is, if you're live anyway, or you could send in an email or give suggestions in other ways. So if you are listening to this and you're like, we haven't talked about this, make sure to send an email or drop a comment if you're live in the chat, because that's always really fun. And that way it's exactly what you all need for your program and your things. So I'm also excited to have some one-on-one calls with several of you. I think there's 5 or 6 signed up that we're coordinating schedules with, which is really fun. So today's topic, as chosen by you all last time, is messaging that matters. So we're talking about boosting engagement on LinkedIn, making sure that we're sharing the right screen and that everything is good. So messaging that matters. And we had kind of a mini topic that was brought up last time was about private messages as well. So we're going to talk about engagement metrics, and how to stack content. Like, what does the program post? What does IDEA post? What do I post as individuals? And then also a little bit about private messaging, which a lot of companies don't really look at. So it's kind of an interesting perspective that I'm excited to talk about today. So again, just a short, like 15-20 minute talk, and then it opens for Q&A and other things that we don't record. So logging on live, you can really dive in a little deeper as well. So when we talk about messaging that matters, for this session, we're going to learn how to write and structure messages, and messages in this case is content, right? So posts, content, and actual physical direct messages that create engagement, not just like passive announcements. So we're going to talk about writing for connection, not perfection, and using that content stacking between the personal programming group pages, and then making sure that we're always aligning the message with our audience and getting them to convert. Anyone that knows me personally knows that I am like obsessed with funnels and sales funnels. And all of this is a big funnel, right? We want people to see our message on LinkedIn and click through to our page and then actually apply and then be a student in our program and then graduate and then go on LinkedIn and share about our program and become loyal word of mouth advocates to help recruit even more people. Or then they go into another funnel where then they are donate to our programs. They contribute as speakers or as partners, whether that's monetarily or in other ways, right? So it's all a funnel of how you can continue to build trust and loyalty. And it all starts with that, making sure the aligning the message with the audience and what their pain points are at that time is super, super important. We'll talk about that. So it's so simple in some ways, but it's often the most overlooked step. I know when I'm planning and designing events, I always say, wait a second, wait a second, wait a second. I know we've always done things like this before, but like, what's the purpose of this event? Do we actually need to have this event? What's the purpose of this meeting? Do we actually need to have this meeting? I know we have a weekly faculty meeting. Do we actually need to have it, right? So what's the intention? It's the exact same thing with the post, right? With the LinkedIn post. Before you write your post, ask, who is this for, right? Who's the audience? What do I want them to feel or do? And why would they care? Why do they engage with this post? Again, it's so simple, but it's one of those things that's overlooked often, right? If anyone's a Simon Sinek fan, it's all about purpose, right? Purpose is something that we all talk about, but it's just often overlooked because we didn't take the time to be intentional about it. So I'm always saying, who is the subject for this post? Because then it helps me write the content to address their pain points. So some programs, the post could be to recruit students. In some programs, it could be to attract media attention, and that's a different target market, right? In some posts, it could be exposure to alumni or sponsors to get them to buy into a fundraising campaign or an event. And all of those are completely fine. We just have to have them in our mind when we're writing that post so we can make sure that we're engaging with the right audience and using the right words to get them to like, comment, engage, follow up, go to the website, do the thing we want them to do. So again, super simple, but often overlooked. So an example of that, of writing that message with that intention, right? If we're writing a post, oftentimes what we think, we're just advertising what we're doing. So we're like, we hosted an event on community leadership. Nobody cares. Sorry. No offense. Sorry if that's super offensive. Nobody cares. Nobody cares if you host an event. Good for you. I'm going to keep scrolling. I'm not going to click see more. I'm not going to go to the website, right? But if that event was for graduate students on community leadership, just tweaking that first line of what happens when graduate students realize they're capable of leading real world change. Well, now if I'm a grad student or a potential grad student, I'm like, I'm thinking, I'm introspective. I might click see more, like on the post, right, to read the full post. It's the exact same content. It's just written with your target market in mind, right? And that opening line becomes so important. Oftentimes, we're just advertising what we're doing and not keeping in mind who that target market is. It's a little bit in the sales and marketing and communication realm, but really, really important. When I'm thinking about engagement, right, when we look at the science of engagement, right, not just activities, but like true engagement, I love to give the example, like if you think about Netflix and you sit down and you watch 6 hours of Netflix, well, Netflix is not giving you activities and worksheets, right? But you are actively engaged in the process, oftentimes not turning off the TV, right? So there is a difference between interaction, which is oftentimes activities, and true engagement. And the same is done in our messaging and our content and our communication. So when we think about like what makes something engagement, what engaging, what would make your LinkedIn post engaging, what makes your company or your marketing engaging, it's relevance plus emotion plus clarity. So in the sales and marketing world, we often say a confused mind never buys. And I just wish that higher education marketing could understand that. Because if I'm looking at program offerings and I have like 17 different certificates and certifications or specializations, and they all have the word child in it, or they all have the word food in it, but I don't know any of these things, I'm not going to sign up for anything, right? I want one clear thing that I'm like, okay, I understand what that means, right? And then you have to make it relevant to me and the pain points that I have. So relevance and clarity, and then you've got to tie in that emotional. We oftentimes buy with emotion. And when it's a very expensive item or a big investment, we oftentimes get triggered by emotion, and then we have to follow up with logic, right? And so you fill out the application with emotion. You're like, yes, I want to do this. And then you see the bill and you're like, do I really want to do it? Right? And so we have to think about these even as something as simple as a LinkedIn post, because that is engagement, right? Like, how are we structuring that content and that post so that way it's relevant, it has some emotional pieces, and it's very clear. It's very clear who you're talking to, right? So we can think meta, we can think really specific here, but that is engagement overall. So when you look at the anatomy of an engaging post, it kind of has 4 points. Sometimes one or two of them are overlooked, but we really do have 4 points for anatomy. First one is the hook. And the opening line is so important because when you are on LinkedIn and really anywhere, email, your subject line, right? When you're looking at, if you're on TikTok scrolling, that first little piece, are you continuing to scroll? What is the hook? Right? It grabs the attention, it asks a question, it gets you engaged and like, oh, I need to read more. Oh, I need to click more. Oh, I need to open the email. Oh, I need to watch the rest of the video, right? So that hook's really important. And that hook has to be super relevant to your target market. So that's where it goes back to intention. Like, who are you writing this for? Then you want to add a human story or a detail. This can be a line, this can be a paragraph, it can be several lines that are spaced out as if they're mini paragraphs because white space is important. You just want to give some context, right? This could be that whole, we hosted a community event. So you start with like, have you ever thought with this graduate student, whatever, and then you're giving context. We asked the same question, or our grad students at our recent community leadership event asked this question, and it made us think, right? Like it made us think, you give a value, what are the readers gaining or learning? And then a call to engage, like, what are your thoughts on this, right? So those 4 items. I will say when it comes to using artificial intelligence or large language models like ChatGPT or Gemini, I know Mel's on here, very anti-Gemini, but when you use any of these programs, the biggest issue and how you can tell when it's artificially written with AI is it's lacking the human story element. Unless you're specifically prompting AI to make up or add a human story element, it's often very generic, and that's how you can oftentimes tell if something's AI written or not. So if you do use AI, like we talked about last time in session 3, if you're going to use AI to map out an entire month of content for you in an hour or two, make sure that you're going in and adding that second part, that human story about, my sister's brother's grandma did this thing, right? Or like this alumni student from 7 years ago works at this company whose CEO did this cool thing, right? Just make sure you have a human story because AI doesn't make that up very well, right? So that's your anatomy. And so there's kind of 3 elements I think of with engagement when I think about the post, right? The first is just the actual logistic part, like the actual like layout of the post. Content with images gets 2 times more engagement than text only posts on LinkedIn, right? Different Instagram, different Facebook, different Twitter, or X or whatever, right? But content with images on LinkedIn gets 2 times more engagement. Carousels and PDFs are the most engaging post format because of something called dwell time. It's how long they spend on your post. So they are the most engaging. The average post lasts up to 48 hours on LinkedIn compared to Twitter or X at 15 minutes. This does vary on a personal page versus company page. So when I talked about this a year ago, LinkedIn was 48 hours. Now, most of the analytics for LinkedIn is 36 hours, unless it's a really engaging post, then it's 48 hours. But again, comments can keep a post alive. So when we say alive, still showing up in people's news feeds. A company page is a little bit shorter at 24 hours. So your posts on your company page, business page, right, program page will continue to show up in people's news feeds even if you have no engagement for up to 24 hours. And then after that, it's going to be based on your engagement, your likes and comments and shares and things like that. Commenting boosts post reach 4 times more than just a like. We're always asking for comments. And then just on your personal page, posts with I or me get 30% more engagement because again, AI, we're looking for personal stories. Personal stories perform better. That metric is not in the algorithm for company pages. Okay, so that one's a little bit different. So those are the logistics of a post, right? And then you have the actual algorithm, which I've showed this slide if you were in Kansas City. I had this same slide in Kansas City. LinkedIn doesn't publish the exact formula, like this is 0.3 and this is 0.7, and it tweaks it from time to time. But the order is exactly the same. So what I give above with the +1 point, +5 points, that's to show you like an example where we could do activities, like hands-on activities with it to kind of show kind of those things. But we do know that comments and saves are heavy hitters. We don't tend to save a lot of things on LinkedIn, so we talk about comments a lot. And then shares are next, and then the emoticons, right? The likes and the hearts and the cares and all those things. So that is how the algorithm works. So you want comments. And the advantage of a program page is program pages can get a lot of comments, right? Because you're asking for feedback all the time if you're not just passively sharing information. And then we have engagement triggers. Now, this comes from my field in psychology. So you want to look at this from a different bit of a lens. But these are the psychological nudges. Vulnerability, right? So people want to hear that you are a human being posting and not chat. So it builds a lot of trust. So if you can share like, this didn't work, or this is what I'm trying instead, or this almost didn't work, here's what I learned. Curiosity is a nice nudge there, validation and conversation, right? Ending with a real question, not a rhetorical one. A lot of people ask rhetorical questions and then they wonder why nobody's writing comments with answers. And it's like, that's not a real question. That's like something to ponder philosophically, right? So these are from this particular slide, the triggers, that's more from a psychological lens, not necessarily something that you'll see in a LinkedIn manual, right? But it gets you to click the see more for sure. Questions on that part before we go into stacking or comments or anything? Okay. I know sometimes it can be a lot. There's a lot of things in there, but okay. So then when we talk about content stacking, and I will pull up an example after we stop recording of a faculty member at a school who does this really well, but just didn't want to put it in the recording. I did ask permission to share to the group, and I got permission to share, just not in the recording. And so we'll talk about that a little bit after we stop recording. But when we talk about content stacking, we have to remember like what the purpose of the pages are. You have your personal page, like faculty, staff, and admin. Like I am Krista Malik. I have a personal LinkedIn page, right? And then we have our program and department pages. And maybe you have both. Maybe you have one, right? And the purpose of those is like authority and credibility. And then you have like the alliance page, right? Idea, or then you have other groups, right? Which community and discussion. So they all have a little bit of a different tone and they all have different things that thrive on their particular platform. So like what to post behind the scenes, moments, reflections, quotes, celebrations, and then announcements, alumni stories, student stories, highlights, events. And then when we look at shared wins or polls or conversation starters, these are like example topics, right? Not all inclusive, but what I see happening a lot is one of these entities, right, will post something, and then the other groups, programs, departments, faculty will share it. And there is some power in understanding who should make the original post and then who should be sharing it, right? So we should not assume that IDEA should post everything at the beginning and everybody else will share it, right? Sometimes we really want faculty to share, and then the organization, shares it, and then IDEA shares it, and then it continues to grow that way. So understanding who's making the original post and then who's sharing from there becomes really important. And that's probably where I do most of the training when I'm within a program of like, okay, the faculty post like these kinds of stories, so we can do like a training. And oftentimes we put that under personal branding. Like, hey, faculty, like we're going to teach you to be the best personal branding you could be so you can get better grants, and you're speaking to their pain points, right? So you can recruit better grad students and you could do this stuff. And then they're super invested. And then they want to post on LinkedIn, even though you're just trying to get them to post to share. It's all about how you approach it, right? Because if you're a program and you go to your faculty and you're like, I need you to post this so I can share it, like it's never going to happen. We can all say that from our faculty and our staff. So it all depends on how you're training, right? The faculty and staff to do that. So an example of what a stack would look like. A program page could write, our youth development students hosted their first event, and then the faculty could reshare that with their personal experience. Watching my students bring this to life was incredible. And then IDEA could reshare and tag both pages. Collaboration like this shows what's possible through our alliance, right? One small example. Oftentimes, I like to give the example of awards, right? Especially if not to genderize it or politicize it, right? But oftentimes, women, imposter syndrome, like not wanting to brag, not wanting to do those things. So, this is in research. This is not just like me making something up. This is in research that women tend to have a harder time sharing those things. So if a program posts like, oh, we're super proud of, Kristen Malik for winning this global teaching award, then I'm more likely to share it because it came from somebody else, right? And then I still get to share it. It's weird for like a faculty to be like, look at me, and then the program post it. Right? That's where that origin, like who posts the original story becomes a little bit more important in terms of like the actual comment and reaction and who's going to respond to it. Questions on that, the content stacking portion of it? Okay, pretty good. And the tagging, of course. And then we get into private messages. This was really fascinating for me to dive into deeper because I do a lot with private messaging from a individual perspective, from a consulting perspective, from a speaker perspective, for-profit company perspective. But I will be honest, I had never dove into it from an educational recruitment perspective. And so for the last 2 weeks, like I've had a lot of fun, like diving deep into it, which is really fun, and talking to people and, doing all the things. So to like take it back to its basics, the purpose of private messaging is really a relationship accelerator, right? DMs should not be for selling, DMs being direct messaging. It's not supposed to be for selling, but people try to sell all the time, right? They're really for deepening that connection, especially after public engagement. So you think of it like a public post builds visibility, private messages build trust. That's how we think about private messages, right? On LinkedIn. But so often in the horrible car sales world of LinkedIn, as some salesperson adds you and then immediately sends you a sales message, and then you like take away the connection and you block them, right? Some people are just super salesy. So there's really, in all my research, both theoretically in actual research and then through talking with companies, educational companies, and then higher educational institutions, which a lot of higher educational institutions are not sending private messages. I've only talked to one. I think of the like 9 or 10 I talked to, I sent messages, emails to, only one was actually using messages. So does that mean that we shouldn't? No. Does that mean that people are underutilizing it? Maybe. Uh, it's a tool, right? And we don't have to use every tool that's available. But there's 5 times that we should think about when sending a message, right? So as a program, an educational program, if I make a post and someone comments on that post with anything thoughtful, it is completely okay to send a message, right? Thank you so much for that engaging post or comment. Thank you so much for writing a comment on that thing. Not only will you deepen the connection, you make them feel seen and feel heard, and they're also more likely to write comments on future posts, which is awesome because comments keep posts alive, right? So I love to follow up with messages when there's a comment on a post, right? And I do that personally, but absolutely in a higher education setting, completely okay to do that. Number two, if you're trying to continue a conversation from a group or an event. So, like in Kansas City, I was very fortunate to come down to speak about LinkedIn. And a lot of people in that room sent me messages after that. And I went through and like talked to 3 or 4 people individually about like their personal like LinkedIn profile, right? Totally okay to send a message for that. Like if I met someone through an event or from a community or an online community group, right? It was great connecting with you. I'd love to stay in touch. Or what are your thoughts on this? Or, I'm thinking through this. I would love to hear your thoughts on the topic, things like that. The third one, which I love to do with grad students, sharing something valuable or relevant, especially if it aligns with their interest or work. So if I see any article that makes me think of somebody, or there's a specific feedback or things like that, then I will send it to that grad student. Can also do it with undergrad. I just don't always know like all the undergrad student interests, right? But like I saw this article, I thought of you, right? Or I saw this updated thing. Totally okay to send a message. And then you're building trust, right? And then the last two, fourth, obviously to invite collaboration or connection, right? If you're looking for somebody to interview or to collaborate on a project or a grant or a new initiative or to get a quote for advertising or marketing, absolutely send them a message. And then obviously to welcome new connections. I think companies in general don't utilize this very well, never mind higher ed. Just saying like, thanks for connecting. Like, thanks for connecting. Look forward to seeing what you post or your content or staying connected. So if I was higher education, oh, I would do a 3-stack, which we'll talk about, I think on the next slide. I do a 3-stack of messages. But when not to send a message, not necessarily higher ed, but definitely could be higher ed. A cold outreach with no context. If you have a recruiter for your company, and they're doing LinkedIn or LinkedIn messaging, like you should screenshot this and like send it to them because so often recruiters will send like cold outreach with no context. It can actually hurt the trust or the brand, right? If a group or a program page messages individuals unprompted with no connection, right? If I am, you know, plant sciences and I just like randomly looked somebody up. They hadn't engaged with my group, they hadn't become a member, they hadn't written a comment, and I just like send them a cold call message. Just like, hey, look at our program. Like, not only is that not good, but it's gonna hurt trust in our brand. I don't like to send messages immediately after someone accepts your connection. Like in that moment, it's a little salesy, subconsciously. You can wait like a day or 2 days, right? And that's okay. And then if you're trying to avoid a public response, companies do this all the time. Say that you messed up or did something bad, or you made a post and it was accidentally offensive to somebody, and someone writes a comment that it was offensive, and then you send them a message to try to placate them. Don't do that, right? If somebody writes a comment publicly, you should address the comment publicly and then also say you'll follow up via message. You don't want to look like you're avoiding a public response. This you can see this all the time on TripAdvisor or Yelp or any of those rating sites where people will say like thank you so much for your amazing message to all the positives, and then they don't address the negatives. Or that's the opposite. They only address the negatives and then they don't address the positives, which means that people are going to stop writing positives. So you have to address both positives and negatives publicly. And then obviously sending mass messages as a sales tool. We don't like to do that. So that 3-message framework, and then I think I'm done and we'll open it up to Q&A. There's a chat, just want to make sure. Okay, nope, you're good. 3-message framework. So I like to send 3 messages. I like to first send a connection message, short, warm intro, like, hey, I noticed we're both part of this network. Love seeing your work, right? I do this with all the association affiliation groups I'm in, or if I go to a conference that has like an association membership model, I'll go add people and I'll be like, hey, I noticed we're both a part of this particular network. Why I like to send that message is not just for building relationships and trust. It's also for me to understand how I met someone or as a program, like how they've interacted with the program. Because in the future, if you ever are interacting with said individual, you're gonna be like, how did I know them? Where did I meet them? How did they interact with our program? And if it's a woman who's changed their name through marriage, right? You're like, were they a student? Are they an alumni? Were they a guest speaker? Like, how do we know them? Having that message that's like a summary of how you connected or how you met someone is really, really helpful. I love to go back in the messages to be like, oh, this is how I knew this person, right? So that short connection message. The follow-up message after engagement, again, genuine human-centered comment. Thank you so much for that post. It really resonated, etc. And then later on, a collaborative message before a sales pitch, right? Like before you say you should apply to be one of our students, right? Would you be open to chatting about how our programs might cross-promote? This is if you want to go the direct message route. You don't have to, right? You absolutely do not have to. Just some people were asking about it, and so I thought would talk about it because you guys asked about it. Last slide. Engagement is not just about the algorithms, like true engagement. It's about alignment. So when you're talking about a post or a message or an email or an advertising piece or even your application for admission, really, if it aligns with the mission and their need, right, then that engagement happens naturally. So just keep that in mind. So that's it. That's it for the 15 to 20 minutes, which was really kind of